How well do you know Oscar Wilde? Oscar Wilde once said, "I find it harder and harder every day to live up to my blue china," reflecting his penchant for wit and self-deprecating humour. Wilde's last words were reportedly, "My wallpaper and I are fighting a duel to the death. One or the other of us has to go," showcasing his flair for the dramatic even in death. Wilde's homosexuality was not widely known during his lifetime, but became a scandal during his trial for gross indecency, leading to his imprisonment and eventual downfall. Wilde was a prolific playwright, poet, and essayist, known for his sharp wit, flamboyant personality, and enduring contributions to literature and culture. Wilde once lectured in the United States on aestheticism while wearing a silk kimono. How well do you know Emily Dickinson? Emily Dickinson rarely left her house and wore only white dresses later in life, becoming increasingly reclusive as she grew older. Dickinson wrote nearly 1,800 poems, but fewer than a dozen were published in her lifetime, with the majority discovered after her death. Dickinson's poetry often explores themes of death, immortality, and the afterlife, reflecting her fascination with mortality and the unknown. Dickinson's unconventional punctuation and syntax was often corrected by editors and challenged traditional poetic forms, making her poetry distinctive and experimental. Dickinson communicated with the outside world primarily through letters, exchanging correspondence with friends, family, and fellow poets throughout her life. How well do you know F. Scott Fitzgerald? Fitzgerald was named after his second cousin, 3 times removed, Francis Scott Key, who wrote the lyrics to the Star-Spangled Banner. He married Zelda Sayer, who struggled with mental illness and spent much of her life in psychiatric institutions and was an influential figure in the 1920s jazz age. Their tumultuous relationship inspired much of his writing. Fitzgerald was a heavy drinker and struggled with alcoholism for most of his life, which eventually led to his early death at the age of 44. He coined the term the jazz age to describe the cultural boom of the 1920s, during which he and his wife were prominent figures. Fitzgerald was deeply in debt when he died, and his works only achieved widespread acclaim posthumously, particularly The Great Gatsby, which is now considered a classic of American literature. Fitzgerald's tombstone in Maryland bears an epitaph from The Great Gatsby. How well do you know Roald Dahl? Dahl was a fighter pilot during World War II and survived a plane crash, landing in the desert and serving as a spy for the British during World War II. He had a fascination with medicine and often included gruesome medical procedures in his stories, such as the scene in The Witches, where the witches removed their masks to reveal their true horrifying faces. Dahl was married to actress Patricia Neal, with whom he had 5 children, but their marriage was tumultuous and ended in divorce. He invented over 500 new words and phrases, including whiz popper, a word for flatulence, and oompa loompa. Dahl was known for his mischievous sense of humour and once sent a letter to a children's school pretending to be the Queen of England, encouraging them to work hard and obey their teachers. Dahl's first published piece was a travel article about a hot air balloon crash. Roald Dahl's children's book Matilda was inspired by his own daughter, Olivia, who loved reading. How well do you know H.P. Lovecraft? Lovecraft was a prolific letter writer, writing over 100,000 letters in his lifetime and corresponded with many other writers and fans of his work, sharing ideas and encouragement. He was a staunch atheist and skeptic, yet his writing often explored themes of cosmic horror and the unknown. Lovecraft's work gained popularity posthumously, as he was relatively obscure during his lifetime. He had a fear of the ocean, which is evident in some of his stories such as The Shadow over Innsmouth and The Call of Cthulhu. Lovecraft had a difficult childhood, marked by the death of his father and financial struggles, which may have contributed to his later themes of existential dread and cosmic insignificance. Lovecraft's writing often reflected his intense fear of the unknown and his struggles with mental illness, including severe anxiety and depression. How well do you know Stephen King? King is known for his love of rock music and often references bands and songs in his writing. He struggled with alcohol and drug addiction in the 1980s, but eventually overcame his addictions. King was once hit by a car walking near his home in Maine, an experience he later incorporated into his novel On Writing. He's a huge fan of baseball and frequently references the sport in his novels and stories. King has a fear of the number 13 and once refused to stay in a hotel room numbered 217. King was once a high school janitor. Stephen King's novel Carrie was rejected by numerous publishers before finally being accepted for publication. How well do you know J.K. Rowling? J.K. Rowling wrote the first draft of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone on a manual typewriter, as she couldn't afford a computer at the time. Rowling's manuscript for Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was initially rejected by 12 publishers before finally being accepted for publication. Rowling was fired from her job as a secretary for daydreaming about Harry Potter, a turn of events that ultimately led her to pursue writing full-time. Rowling wrote the first chapter of the last Harry Potter book years before finishing the rest of the series, knowing how she wanted to end the story from the beginning. Rowling's Harry Potter series has been translated into over 80 languages, becoming one of the best-selling book series in history and spawning a successful film franchise. How well do you know Fyodor Dostoevsky? Dostoevsky was sentenced to death by firing squad for his involvement in a political group opposed to the Tsarist regime, but the sentence was commuted at the last minute. Dostoevsky struggled with severe epilepsy throughout his life, which heavily influenced his writing and characters, such as Prince Mishkin in The Idiot. Dostoevsky had a gambling addiction and was known to frequent casinos, often losing large sums of money and plunging himself into debt. Dostoevsky's works often explored themes of existentialism, alienation, and the human psyche, reflecting his own inner turmoil and struggles. Dostoevsky's writing style is characterized by its psychological depth and exploration of the darker aspects of human nature, earning him a reputation as one of the greatest psychological novelists. How well do you know Leo Tolstoy? Tolstoy renounced his noble title and wealth later in life, choosing to embrace a life of poverty and simplicity. He had a fascination with vegetarianism and promoted ethical living, advocating for a meat-free diet. Tolstoy wrote some of his works in the nude, believing it increased productivity and freedom of thought. Tolstoy had a troubled marriage and wrote extensively about the difficulties of romantic relationships in his novels, reflecting his own marital struggles. Tolstoy attempted to start his own religion, known as Tolstoyanism, which emphasized nonviolence, simplicity, and communal living. How well do you know Mark Twain? Twain was born shortly after Halley's Comet appeared in 1835, and he predicted he would go out with it. He died in 1910, the year it returned. Twain had a lifelong fascination with science and technology and was known to invest in various inventions, some of which were unsuccessful. Twain patented 3 inventions, including a self-pasting scrapbook, a history trivia game, and a garment strap. Twain had a quirky sense of humor and often played practical jokes on family and friends, earning him a reputation as a notorious prankster. Twain was a strong supporter of women's rights and was friends with suffragist Susan B. Anthony, advocating for women's suffrage and equality throughout his life. How well do you know Ernest Hemingway? Hemingway survived multiple near-death experiences, including plane crashes and surviving anthrax and pneumonia. Hemingway was a big cat lover and had many polydactyl cats, descendants of which still live at his former home in Key West, Florida. Hemingway survived multiple plane crashes, including one in Africa that left him with severe injuries. He was reported dead in one in Africa, leading to newspapers publishing his obituary, which he found amusing. Hemingway was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1953 and the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1954. Hemingway's drinking and volatile temper strained his relationships with friends and family, contributing to his eventual suicide.